Hello and welcome to Commendable Commotion, where the creative arts intersect with true crime and power politics. Today's episode was not recorded by me. Instead, it is a re-upload of a new episode of Steven Snider's podcast, The Farm. In the episode, Steven had me on as a guest to talk about Stanley Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut. Specifically, you'll hear about when I met Kubrick's personal assistant, Emilio D'Alessandro, and the creepy things that happened on the set of Eyes Wide Shut, as related to me by Emilio, only a couple of months ago. You'll hear all about that around 57 minutes into this episode. But before that, Steven Snider will go into detail about an infamous businessman who may be linked to this story. It's a roller coaster of an episode, so I hope fans of Stanley Kubrick and of all things mysterious generally will enjoy. So without further ado, here is Steven Snider's new episode of The Farm.
Hello, folks, and welcome to The Farm, a podcast dedicated to culture, parapolitics, and high weirdness in all its many forms. This is your host, Recluse, aka Steven Snider, the longtime curator of the Visa blog and author of The Art, The Secret History of Psy-War, Conspiratainment, and the Shattering of Reality, Book 1. If you like what you hear here today, be sure to check me out at visupview.blogspot.com. That's VISUPVIEW, all one word, .blogspot.com. And procure a copy of that book and my other works at The Farm's official store, which is at The Farm Podcast, all one word, thefarmpodcast.store. And please consider signing up for The Farm's Patreon. On the lowest tier, you get 2 additional full-length shows per month. That's between 3 and 4 hours of bonus material with exclusive guests and content. The upper tier, you get that in addition to access to the farm's monthly Zoom party meetings, my dispatches from my various journeys across the United States and all the weird hotspots that I hit up, State of the Unions, where you get my musings on the geopolitical state of the world, and so much more. It's a lot of content, folks, so please consider checking that out. Okay, today's guest is back for round 2 on The Farm. He is a filmmaker who studied at theater studies at University College Dublin. His podcast and Substack blog, both called Commendable Commotion, examines the connections between the creative arts and the dark realms of parapolitics and true crime. His new documentary, Mothman, the Film That Never Was, premiered at the 2024 Mothman Festival this past September in good old Point Pleasant, West Virginia, and we'll have some more details about its release at the end of this. Anyway, folks, I give you guys Matthew Tatum, LG. Matthew, thank you so much for dropping by again today, sir.
Hi Stephen, pleasure to be back with you.
All right, folks, this show is going to be off the chain. Matthew recently got an incredible source close to the great Stanley Kubrick, and he certainly got a juicy story from them, one that puts Eyes Wide Shut in an entirely new light, both the film itself and what went on behind the scenes. Very excited about these revelations. However, before we can get to that, I need to explain the context. For the full weight of the source's comments will not be obvious unless we break down one of the most notorious deep events in British history, the death of Princess Diana. Yes, this legitimately ties into the making of Eyes Wide Shut, especially as it relates to the man who died with Diana, filmmaker Dodi Fayed, and his mysterious father, Harold's owner and international man of mystery, Mohamed Al-Fayed. This is going to be absolutely groundbreaking show if you're into parapolitics, Kubrick, or both. So on that note, let us start the show. All right. There's a lot I need to unpack here before we get into the juicy stuff, so please bear with me. Our story begins with Mohamed Al-Fayed when he was just Fayed. He was born in a small Egyptian town called Matariya, located between Alexandria and Port Said. He was reputed to enjoy links to the British security services from a young age. Al-Fayed was known to be a regular smuggler of hashish from Israel to Egypt during the 1950s. This was prior to the Suez Crisis, at a time when British and French forces were still occupying Egypt. Al-Fayed supposedly did some quote-unquote dirty work for British military intelligence in the lead up to and during Suez. In 1952, Al-Fayed first met Aden Khashoggi, the notorious Saudi arms merchant. Then 17-year-old Aden hired Al-Fayed to work at Al-Nazar, his Saudi-based import business. The Khashoggis were impressed. Al-Fayed married Samira Khashoggi, Aden's sister, in 1954. But he soon had an affair, likely in Europe, conducting business on behalf of the Khashoggi family, no less. They divorced in 1956, incidentally the same year the Suez Crisis occurred. Aden Khashoggi reportedly despised Al-Fayed for the way he treated his sister, but there are indications Al-Fayed remained engaged in the arm industry for decades to come. He was still employed by Al-Nazar during the early 1960s. When the British were forced out of Egypt during the Suez Crisis, they left a considerable network of assets behind. Mohamed Al-Fayed was likely a part of this network. It has been suggested that the British turned this network over to Israel following the Suez Crisis, and I think that's quite plausible. Lord Julian Amory was deeply involved in Britain's destabilization efforts in Egypt prior to the crisis. His private intelligence network in the Middle East was said to far surpass MI6's. Julian's father, Leopold Amory, was actually one of the authors of the Balfour Declaration and one of the most prominent Jewish Zionist politicians in UK during the first half of the 20th century, probably of all time for that matter. Julian Amory became more active in British politics following Suez, which makes it entirely possible he did turn part of his Middle Eastern network over to the Israelis. Was Al-Fayed a part of this network? Aden Khashoggi was certainly a part of the network Amory helped establish in Yemen to harass Egyptian forces after they invaded the country in 1962 and part of the Aden crisis. On the other hand, the CIA believed Egyptian intelligence was using Al-Nazar as a front and that Al-Fayed was a senior agent for them. Of course, they had previously used Al-Fayed as an quote-unquote ops contact before disregarding him for his unreliability. The CIA became especially interested in his next business venture when they saw that it was in the Western Hemisphere. It unfolded in 1964 when Al-Fayed was living in Haiti, of all places. He turned up there with a letter of introduction to Papa Dvaler, the island's notorious longtime dictator. Al-Fayed was interested in developing the nation's oil reserves, and he had acquired an interesting business partner towards this end, George de Mohrenschildt. Yes, you heard that right. The same man who became Lee Harvey Oswald's dear friend in Dallas and introduced the city's white Russian community to Mr. Oswald. The same guy whose nephew attended an elite prep school with George H.W. Bush, and the same man who asked Poppy Bush for assistance when he was CIA director and de Mohrenschildt's role in the JFK assassination was being investigated. The very same George D. Mohrenschildt. In Haiti, Al-Fayed was installed at the former residence of Clement Barbot, the former head of Haiti's secret police. Al-Fayed had promised Papa Doc a wharf and oil refinery in the nation's capital. Valentine Petroleum, an American company, was already building a refinery in Haiti that was being partly funded by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Papa Doc canceled the contract and he pocketed the money and asked for a new contract from Al-Fayed, or rather a proposal. It seems this was all likely cover for Haiti to negotiate an arms contract. Al-Fayed also found the time to have affairs with the daughters of de Mohrenschildt and Papa Doc. It's quite an accomplishment there. By the end of 1964, he had worn out his welcome with Papa Doc while the CIA was actively trying to force him out of Haiti. Seeing the writing on the wall, Al-Fayed took his leave, but probably pocketed a considerable sum of money on the way out, and he seems to have continued having dealings in Haiti up to probably at least the early 1980s. He was pretty close to, oh gosh, I can't remember the finance minister's name now. Claremont, I think, or something like that. But he had some very interesting connections in Haiti all throughout the ensuing decades. Anyway, Al-Fayed next turned up in central England, where he made lucrative contracts among expat Arab community there. At the top of the list was Mahdi Al-Tajir, a millionaire investor and one-time United Arab Emirates ambassador to the UK. So the oil boom soon took off in Dubai, and Al-Fayed was well placed to cash in. He managed to secure investment from the UK to build up the UAE's facilities, netting handsome commissions in the process. In 1974, he joined the board of Lunro along with several other Arab investors, most of them from the UAE. Al-Fayed and the rest of the Muslims left the board over Lunro's involvement in Israel, at least allegedly. But as we will see, this whole narrative for that is very questionable. And my source for this, by the way, was Richard Hall in his biography of Tiny Roland, who also had his own motivations and how he told this, to put it mildly. Anyway, at the time, Lunro was controlled by the aforementioned British tycoon Tiny Roland. Even after Al-Fayed left Lunro, Roland maintained contact and used him to acquire dirt on Tajir. But unbeknownst to Roland, Al-Fayed had his own designs. It's possible Tiny and Al-Fayed had known one another even before Al-Fayed joined Lunro. Both men were part of what is variously referred to as the Mayfair-Claremont set. They were a group of aristocrats and capitalists who intersected at the Claremont Club, a VIP casino in London's wealthy and swank Mayfair district. In addition to Al-Fayed and Tiny, other members included Colonel David Sterling, a co-founder of the SAS and a close political ally of Julian Amory. He was also active in the whole Yemen thing as well. There was also Jim Slater, a co-founder of the notorious British conglomerate Slater Walker, and perhaps most intriguingly of all, Sir James Goldsmith. During the 1980s, good old Sir Jimmy became a leading corporate raider for Drexel Burnham Lambert, the American investment bank made infamous by junk bond king Michael Milken during the 1980s, the individual who inspired Oliver Stone's Wall Street. Donald Trump later pardoned Milken during his first presidency. Trump was a part of that whole circle around Milken, which also included Sir Jimmy, Trump's notorious personal attorney, Roy Cohn, and the young Jeffrey Epstein. In many ways, Sir Jimmy was the grandfather of Brexit. Both he and Al-Fayed upended British politics during the 1990s. We'll get to Al-Fayed's shenanigans in just a moment here. At this point, I need to pause and briefly address Lunro. It was founded in 1909 as the London and Rhodesian Mining and Land Company Limited. As the name implies, its primary interests were mining concerns in Africa. It was very closely entwined with the British establishment, especially following the dissolution of the empire. One of the big people to join up with Lunro in this time was Duncan Sandys, a former conservative minister and Winston Churchill's one-time son-in-law. Sandys was also part of Julian Amory's Yemen network and a longtime political ally. Amory and Sandys were also leading figures in the Monday Club, a far-right Tory ginger group that started around the 1960s. So during the Cold War, Lunro was a crucial front for the British to look after their interests in Africa. Tiny Roland became the CEO in 1962 and held this post until 1993. During his three-decade reign, Lunro diversified, becoming a true conglomerate. In keeping with the times, it began buying a wide variety of businesses during the 1970s. At the forefront was an aggressive attempt to take over Harrods, the celebrated British department store. Roland was obsessed with acquiring Harrods and had enlisted several fronts to buy stock in the company for this purpose. At one point, he had actually even tried to enlist Rupert Murdoch to clandestinely buy shares for him. Lunro had directly acquired nearly 30% of Harrods' shares in November 1984, when it abruptly cashed out. The official explanation was that Roland had grown fed up with after the British Monopolies Commission wanted more time to review Lunro's holdings in Harrods. The buyers were all Al-Fayed and his two brothers. Roland seems to have believed he would get the go-ahead to buy back into Harrods after the 3-month review was over, so he decided to make a quick profit by selling Lunro's shares to the Al-Fayed brothers with a prearranged buyback price. But the Al-Fayed brothers had their own agenda. They began an aggressive takeover of Harrods. At the time, Roland and Duncan Sandys were on the board. The Al-Fayed brothers demanded their resignations not long after acquiring Lunro's interests. As the Al-Fayed brothers moved to acquire a controlling interest, questions emerged as to where the money was really coming from for the takeover. Some suspected the Sultan of Brunei, then one of the wealthiest men in the world, was secretly financing them. Al-Fayed had previously worked as the Sultan's agent in acquiring the Dorchester Hotel. He also took credit for arranging a 1985 meeting between the Sultan and then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher to enlist the Sultan's assistance in stabilizing the pound sterling. Tiny spread rumors that Mark Thatcher, the Prime Minister's son, had made the arrangements for the Sultan to secure the funding from the Al-Fayed brothers to acquire Harrods. Tiny's source for these rumors may have been Aden Khashoggi. Regardless, it didn't hold up to scrutiny. Still, the source of Al-Fayed's wealth has been the object of speculation for years. He had the power of attorney for the Sultan of Brunei at one point, enabling him to spend the Sultan's funds without the monarch's approval. This led to much confusion as to where the Sultan's wealth ended and Al-Fayed's began. But nonetheless, it's just really murky as to how he became so obscenely rich by the 1970s. Anyway, the feud between Roland and Al-Fayed continued well into the 1990s. Al-Fayed blamed Tiny for the British government's refusal to issue him a passport in 1993. This touched off Al-Fayed's war with the Tories. At the time, the Conservative Party had been in power for 14 years and showed no signs of relinquishing the reins. Al-Fayed seems to have enjoyed good relations with the Tories during Margaret Thatcher's long tenure, which lasted from 1979 to 1990. The same does not appear to have been the case with her replacement, John Major. Al-Fayed almost single-handedly brought down Major's government. He managed this through what was known as the Cash for Questions affair. Essentially, Al-Fayed named the conservative MPs who had taken his money in exchange for asking questions on Al-Fayed's behalf in Parliament. The most notorious figure that he brought down was Jonathan Aitken, Major's secretary to the Treasury. Aitken was extremely connected. He was the grandnephew of Lord Beaverbrook, one of the most powerful media barons in the UK's history, and Aitken had previously dated Carol Thatcher, Margaret's daughter and Mark's sister. In 1999, it was revealed he was actually the father of Katrina Khashoggi, the punitive daughter of Aden Khashoggi. She was the result of an affair Aitken had with Sandra Daly, Aden's wife. During the same time frame, Aitken was also the head of the Recluse. The Recluse began as an outgrowth of Bilderberg during the 1950s, but with a very different agenda. While Bilderberg was dominated by business interests from the UK, US, and the Netherlands, which were all Protestant countries, Le Cercle was much more of a continental Europe and Catholic-centric affair. The founders of Le Cercle were all members of Opus Dei and or the Sovereign Military Order of Malta, better known as the Knights of Malta. The composition began to change during the 1970s with an influx of British Tories, many connected to the Monday Club. Julian Amory and his close political ally Brian Crozier were Le Cercle chairman during the 1980s. Le Cercle became a crucial node in the black network used by the Reagan administration to launch a series of dirty wars across the world during the 1980s to bankrupt the Soviet Union. Iran-Contra, and specifically Iran and Nicaragua, get all the attention, but Africa, and especially the war in Angola, was a major front as well. And Le Cercle was knee-deep in intrigues there involving the arms trade. So, also relevant to this discussion is Le Cercle's longtime association with pedophilia and sexual blackmail. As is fairly well known at this point, quite a few of the Belgian members were implicated in the Dutroux affair. Beyond that, the German wing had close dealings with Colonia Dignidad in Chile for decades. The colony was staffed with former Nazis and played a significant role in Operation Condor, the torture and assassination program various Latin American governments in the Southern Cone participated in during the 1970s. Condor provided part of the infrastructure for the Dirty Wars. Beyond that, Herr Paul Schaefer, the head of Colonia Dignidad, was an arch pedophile. Some children were brought in from Germany, while others were reputed to have been taken from the local villages. Regardless, the amount of controversies Le Cercle has been implicated in is pretty freaking extensive. This makes Al-Fayed's takedown of Aiken all the more intriguing. In this case, Al-Fayed accused Aiken of accepting free stays at the Ritz in Paris, a hotel the Egyptian owned. Later, this was the hotel his son Dodi and Princess Diana departed from shortly before the fateful car crash. But long before then, the Ritz was notorious for another reason: arms trafficking. Apparently, this was one of the main meeting points for armed merchants during the Cold War. Al-Fayed acquired the hotel in 1979, just before Iran-Contra really took off. It's been speculated that outing Aiken in this fashion, i.e. drawing attention to his stays at a luxury hotel well known to international arms barons, was a subtle hint at the stories Al-Fayed could tell about the UK's role in Iran-Contra. Al-Fayed had even teased at this in comments he made prior to the crash. From what I've seen, he never brought up the subject again afterwards. But he had before. Aiken was not the first time he played the arms card against the British establishment. The first time occurred in the 1980s during his row with Tiny Rowland over Harrods. In a letter to the British Secretary of State for Trade and Industry, among other allegations of Lunro's corrupt business practices was a subtle hint at the company's role in Libya during the late 1970s. Al-Fayed noted the Tradewinds Air Holdings, a company active in Libya that counted among its board members Gaddafi's cousin and security advisor, was a subsidiary of Lunro. Another figure linked to Tradewinds was then imprisoned CIA officer Edwin Wilson. Wilson shows up in a lot of deep events throughout the 1970s, and it's long been rumored he was engaged in sexual blackmail operations, among a litany of other covert activities. As for Al-Fayed's letter, it triggered a British parliamentary inquiry into Lunro's role in Libya. So, Israel long opposed Gaddafi. Lunro had reasonably friendly relations with Israel. Hell, it even allowed Israel to place agents in the company, Mossad agents, that is. But this may have been a case where the Israelis felt the need to slap Tiny's wrists a bit over dealing with Gaddafi. In this context, it's interesting to note that Israel was reportedly disillusioned by the Anglo-American quote-unquote tilt towards Iraq in the Iran-Iraq war by the late 1980s. Allegedly, Ari bin Mishneh was dispatched to the UK to do quote-unquote whatever was necessary to stop the flow of arms to Iraq. This plays into the whole saga involving Project Babylon and the assassination of Gerald Bull. He was a Canadian engineer who actually helped develop Project HARP, yes, the notorious Project HARP, during the 1960s. Long before then, he began researching railgun technology for the UK and Canada. During the 1980s, he relocated to Brussels, establishing an arms company there with the support of UK backers. He eventually contracted with Iraq to further develop this technology. So this was Project Babylon. It was really ambitious. Essentially, these railguns would be mounted on satellites and fired into space. They would then be used to fire projectiles into the Earth's orbit, from which they would then reach their targets. Suffice to say, Israel was not thrilled by this proposition. In 1990, Bull was assassinated, allegedly by Mossad. As far as the UK was concerned, Israel reportedly targeted right-wing Tories with possible pro-Arab sentiments starting in the late 1980s, especially ones involved in arming Iraq. Jonathan Aiken would have certainly fit the bill. Al-Fayed ousted him in 1995. In some accounts, this was around the same time Prince Andrew was introduced to Epstein as well. John Major's government was defeated in 1997, leading to the return of Labour to power with Tony Blair as the Prime Minister. 6 years later, he would enlist the UK as part of the good old coalition of the willing to topple Saddam Hussein. Was all of this a coincidence, or was Al-Fayed a part of Israeli operations in the UK? It certainly puts an interesting light on the events we're discussing. It's also worth noting that Al-Fayed was reputed to have funded Scallywag, an underground parapolitical publication by outcast journalist Simon Reagan. It was a bit like the far more famous Private Eye. Scallywag first gained notoriety for reporting on certain activities at a boys' home in Wales. Reagan alleged a pedophile plundered this home and provided boys to senior Tories. Scallywag was eventually bankrupted by a libel lawsuit launched by Julian Ludus, a protege of Brian Crozier and a Le Socal affiliate. It's also a part of the old Six Eyes thing that Crozier had. Anyway, it's also noteworthy in this regard that the attorney, Michael Rogers, who was jailed at one point for allegedly stealing Dodi Fayed's money. Rogers had worked as a solicitor for years for Mohamed Al-Fayed prior to this. In fact, his Mayfair offices were just around the corner from a townhouse Al-Fayed owned. Rogers had another noteworthy client during this time as well, Captain Bob, good old Robert Maxwell. He also represented Sir Gordon Rees, a close advisor to Margaret Thatcher. So again, this was the attorney who had worked in this case. Anyway, getting on here to Dodi Fayed. There are a few interesting points in his CV I wanted to briefly touch upon here before getting into the incident. So he attended ever so briefly the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst when he was 19. From there, he briefly served as an attaché at the United Arab Emirates Embassy in London. Dodi had a lifelong obsession with movies, and in 1979, his father agreed to set up his own film company, Allied Stars. In 1981, Allied released Chariots of Fire with Dodi listed as a producer. The film became a major hit, winning the Oscar for Best Picture that year. FX and its sequel followed, both of which became moderate hits. Outwardly, Dodi was thriving, but most insiders insist his father was really the one running Allied Stars and making all the major decisions. Dodi reportedly also developed a considerable cocaine habit during the 1980s. While raised by his father, he remained close to his mother from the Khashoggi side of the family. Following her death in 1986, the Khashoggis reportedly tried to detach Dodi from Mohamed. Apparently, Dodi would periodically play Mohamed against the Khashoggis at times when he was cash-strapped. Dodi's luck at the box office ran out in the 1990s when he produced two flops. One was Steven Spielberg's Hook and the Demi Moore starring adaptation of The Scarlet Letter. Dodi showed no signs of giving up on Hollywood or having cash flow issues, however. Whenever he was in town, he employed former LAPD detective Robert Souza as his personal bodyguard. Souza is a character in his own right. Before breaking into Hollywood as a co-writer of the Harrison Ford picture Hollywood Homicide, he was one of the lead investigators on the Wonderland murders in Laurel Canyon, also known as the Four on the Floor murders and so forth, the ones involving good old John Holmes. Sousa's brother Glenn worked with the LAPD's notorious Vice Squad before being privately employed by producer Cocaine Robert Evans. At one point, the Sousa brothers tried to arrange for Dodi to buy Robert Evans' legendary mansion that Henry Kissinger used to go visit him at, which a mansion that was also reportedly wired everywhere, but it's another topic. Anyway, Evans is, of course, notorious for his alleged role in the Cotton Club murders, among other things. Regardless, having a guy like Robert Sousa is about par of the course for the Fayeds. So, moving on to the Diana Dodi romance. This is in no way, shape, or form meant to be comprehensive. I'm just going to give you a rough overview here. It all started when Mohamed Al-Fayed invited Diana to vacation with him and his family at Saint-Tropez. Mohammed had been friends with Diana's father, the Earl of Spencer, while her stepmother sat on the Herald's International Board during this time. Diana accepted bringing Henry and William with her. Dodi was not with his father when Diana initially arrived, staying on his own yacht. But the romance apparently began not long after Dodi linked up with the party a few days later. Diana had recently ended a relationship with Hasnat Khan, whom she had been seeing for nearly 2 years, just weeks prior to having met Dodi. He had recently ended a relationship with an American actress named Kelly Fisher weeks before meeting Diana as well. So there was an element of rebound for both when they started this romance. The public perception is that this relationship was star-crossed and so forth, but Diana was apparently very serious about Khan, and the breakup was intense for her. Point being, this could have been a factor in how quickly she gravitated to Dodi. This isn't to suggest that this couldn't have been true love, but Diana had a reputation for being very media savvy for a reason. That the tabloids would heavily cover her and Dodi was a given. Further, Diana was still in the midst of her ongoing feud with the royal family. Cozying up to a man like Dodi Fayed when his father was bringing the credibility of the British government into question certainly would have raised an eyebrow or two. Point being, Diana could have easily viewed a relationship with Dodi as a combination PR exercise in a move to subtly rattle the royals rather than some whirlwind affair. As for Dodi, he may not have been any more serious about the relationship than Diana either, but his father would have certainly been aware of what bringing Diana into the family would mean. Dodi would be the stepfather to the future king. So, given how Al-Fayed conducted business, I think it's highly probable he was playing matchmaker when he invited Diana to Saint-Tropez. Sending her up with Dodi was surely always the plan. As I just said, Diana was quite astute in her own right and surely would have been aware of Al-Fayed's designs. But she went along with it, and she may well have been willing to play along with it for some time. I do think it's quite possible the couple may have gone through with getting engaged, but whether Diana would have gone through with actually marrying him is highly debatable in my estimation. I think the biggest hurdle would have been Al-Fayed, Mohammed Al-Fayed himself. Diana had just gotten out of a relationship with a man from a domineering family. Would dealing with Al-Fayed have been much different than the specter of Elizabeth II from Diana's perspective? I think for this reason alone, she would have hit the brakes sooner or later as to not have to deal with another in-law controlling her life. As far as the conspiracy theories concerning motives for assassinating Diana are concerned, at the top of the list is the purported pregnancy between Diana and Dodi. As the story goes, this would have put a Muslim in the royal family, something the Windsors would have never allowed. I find this narrative deeply problematic on a variety of levels. First, while Dodi was raised Muslim, his first wife insisted that he claimed to be Catholic. There are indications if he married Diana, it may have been as part of a Catholic ceremony as well. It's far from certain any potential child would be raised Muslim to begin with, in other words. Secondly, it's highly debatable as to whether Diana was pregnant at the time of her death. She and Dodi had only been an item for about 6 weeks. Obviously, that's more than enough time to get pregnant, but would she have even realized it at this point unless she was trying to get pregnant deliberately? Would she have been trying for a kid with a man she had only known for 6 weeks after coming out of a relationship that had gone on for nearly 2 years? Again, certainly stranger things have happened. However, there are also reports, albeit from biased sources, that Diana had her period not long before her death. Ultimately, I find this to be the weakest aspect of the Diana conspiracy narratives. It's far from certain Diana was pregnant, and even if she were, I don't see her having a child with Dodi as constituting the kind of existential crisis that it's been characterized as. Given what we know about Andrew's relationship with Epstein, this narrative seems even more ridiculous. Surely the family had greater things to worry about at this point than a lawful child between Diana and Dodi. That being said, if Al-Fayed was working for Israel, such concerns become a little bit more plausible. A child plus the dirt Epstein had on Andrew would have left the royals even more vulnerable, to put it mildly. So we'll return to that in a bit. So, all right, let's get into the crash proper. Former MI6 officer Richard Tomlinson, who did some time for revealing state secrets, once alleged that the death of Diana and Dodi closely resembled an assassination plan MI6 had cooked up for Serbian dictator Slobodan Milosevic in 1992. Tomlinson also alleged that Henry Paul, a figure that I'll have more to say on in a moment, was a paid informant for MI6 and a variety of other intelligence services. For those of you unaware, Paul was the driver of the limo. He was also the deputy chief of security for the Ritz and thus an employee of Al-Fayed. So, on the night of the crash, Dodi and Diana were at the Ritz while the press awaited them outside. It was decided to send a decoy car out ahead to draw the attention of the paparazzi, then slip away in a second limo. Apparently, the decision was made by Dodi to take a limo with just Paul driving and no bodyguards. This was in contradiction to the security rules set down by Dodi's own father. Trevor Rees-Jones, another member of the Al-Fayed security detail, was on hand and protested. He was thus allowed to accompany Dodi and the princess, and ultimately he was the only one who survived the crash. A little after midnight, Paul took control of the limo at the entrance of the Pont de Lama underpass. Reportedly, Paul struck a white Fiat Uno, then swerved to the left of the two-lane carriageway. From there, the limo collided head-on with the 13th column that supported the roof of the overpass. Contrary to how it's commonly reported, most reliable accounts indicate that the limo was not being swarmed by paparazzi. The most reliable accounts hold that they were some distance away. Despite this, Paul was allegedly driving at nearly 65 miles an hour, which was twice the legal limit. For good measure, Paul was also said to have been heavily intoxicated. His blood alcohol level was reportedly at 180 milligrams per 100 milliliters of blood. So that's nearly 4 times the legal limit. Despite this, none of the initial witnesses reported Paul as displaying noticeable signs of intoxication. It took a while for additional witnesses to come out of the woodwork. It was further claimed that Paul was in fact a heavy drinker, which is why he was able to appear reasonably sober when most normal people would have been falling down drunk if they were 4 times over the legal limit. The crash is generally chalked up to Paul's reckless driving while in a state of intoxication. Whether he was driving as fast as he was reported to has also been questioned, but I don't think that that's too implausible that Paul would have been speeding. The narrative that he was that drunk with no one, not Dodi, not Diana, not Trevor Rees-Jones, who rode with him in the passenger seat noticing, just doesn't hold up, in my opinion. Even if he was enough of a drunk to cover up his intoxicated state, he would have been reeking of alcohol, sweating badly, etc. That level of intoxication credited to Paul is just unbelievable. As far as I can recall, too, Trevor Rees-Jones never indicated when he was driving, when he was the passenger while Paul was driving, that he saw Paul's driving as being erratic. So it's very, very suspect. On the other hand, the conspiracy theories about the seatbelts are dubious. No one was apparently wearing a seatbelt when the car crashed, which probably contributed to the fatalities. Diana had a reputation for religiously buckling up, which has led some to speculate the seatbelts were tampered with or something. While Diana may have been fanatical about using a seatbelt, I can think of a reason or two why a couple, especially one that had just started dating, might forget to buckle up on the back of a limo. There's also allegations of a bright flash blinding Paul that are dubious. In this narrative, one of the photographers on a motorcycle came up alongside the limo and used an unusually bright flash when snapping a picture. Richard Tomlin would later allege that the same type of blinding flash device was integral to MI6's plans for the Milosevic assassination. This has led a lot of people to investing a considerable amount of time and effort into tracking down these leads. While I don't discount the unusual flash out of hand, I think it was used to distract from the far more likely cause of the crash, namely the mysterious white Fiat Uno. This is one aspect of the crash that the official narrative has no real explanation for. The official narrative is that the Fiat was struck by the limo, which caused Paul to lose control of the vehicle. The Fiat then sped off. French police embarked upon what was reportedly a massive search, but officially never determined the driver. Despite authorities widely insisting that the Fiat played no role in the crash, French police still looked to charge whoever was driving the vehicle with failing to render assistance, which of course would ensure that no one would voluntarily come forward. The French police claimed that they reviewed over 100,000 Fiat Unos as part of the investigation, 5,000 of which were examined and their owners' background checked. However, only two separate interviews of Uno owners have been documented. One was Lee Van Tine, a 22-year-old Vietnamese immigrant. Allegedly, Ton had spray painted the his Uno from white to red just hours prior to the crash and in the middle of the night, no less. His alibi to the police was that he was at work at the time of the crash, which they never checked out. Later, it was revealed he left work early that night, and in fact, that his father's residence was near the Alma Tunnel, and one is left with a compelling suspect. For years, Al-Fayed claimed the car belonged to Jean-Paul James Anderson, however, who was the other man French police interviewed. Allegedly, Anderson was an MI6 contract agent who also played a role in the death of former French Prime Minister Pierre Bergovoy. When police questioned him, he claimed he had sold his Uno prior to the crash, but this was later revealed to be a lie. However, Anderson's wife claimed that he was in bed with her at the time of the crash, and their residence was well over an hour's drive from Paris. Anderson later committed suicide in 2000 by setting himself on fire inside a BMW. His body was incinerated beyond recognition. A hole was found in his head, but authorities claimed it was caused by the heat rather than gunshots. Superficially, Anderson seems like a compelling candidate, but there are some legitimate questions about how drivable his Fiat was at the time of the crash. Obviously, the suicide is curious, but there's yet another layer to this. Lyndon LaRouche. His executive intelligence review was at the forefront of pushing the Fiat Uno narrative. While Al-Fayed never had direct connections to the LaRouche organization, he often endorsed their views on the crash, and he may even have used the EIR for some revenge. In 1999, a list of names of MI6 officers were published online by LaRouche. The revelation came just a week after Al-Fayed's application for a British passport was rejected a second time. Richard Tomlinson was widely suspected as the source. Some believe Al-Fayed put him in contact with LaRouche. But again, that's just an allegation, and it's never been proven. Regardless, the presence of the LaRouche organization in pushing the Fiat Uno narrative also puts Anderson's suicide in a new light. The LaRouche organization has been characterized as a cult, and for good reason. It frequently employed Scientology-like tactics against various figures over the years. One is Roy Cohn, Donald Trump's infamous attorney and mentor, who was literally driven into a breakdown by LaRouche. Granted, this was towards the end of Cohn's life when his health was failing him, but he wasn't exactly known to be easily intimidated. If Roy Cohn could not handle the LaRouche organization, it's not hard to see how someone like Anderson would fold. He was reportedly already having personal problems and was suddenly made into a major media villain by LaRouche. And this is assuming the organization wasn't directly stalking him, which they've been known to do. Still, the white Fiat Uno remains the most likely source of foul play. Further, both sides seem to be attempting to muddy the waters around the Fiat. Al-Fayed had previously brought down several prominent Tory politicians. Point being, he knew the proper channels to go through in order to discredit people in the eyes of the public. LaRouche is not such a channel, and Al-Fayed had to have known in the long run LaRouche would work against him in public opinion. So it's especially interesting he played this card at this point. Another interesting aspect of the conspiracy theories supported by Al-Fayed is that Diana was the primary target in the would-be assassination. While Diana had no doubt become a nuisance to the royals and the broader establishment by 1997, and even expressed fears of being assassinated to friends, she remained immensely popular. And while she had embarrassed Prince and now King Charles, she had hardly threatened the British establishment in the way Al-Fayed's assault on the Tories had. The bigger issue the Doughty-Diana romance would have raised for the British establishment is the added leverage this would have conferred on Al-Fayed and his attacks. Diana had previously spoken out about landmines. Some have alleged the pressure she was bringing on President Clinton to sign a landmine treaty was a factor in her death. Certainly, I think this is far more compelling factor than her producing an Islamic half-brother to the king of the British Empire. Al-Fayed surely ruffled some feathers when he brought down Aiken. He cut his teeth in the arms trade, and he probably knew where a fair amount of the bodies were buried. And now he had arguably the most famous in the world at the time as a possible spokesman for further allegations he wanted to put out there. Diana had already shown a willingness to challenge the arms industry. Thus, I would argue Al-Fayed was the one flying too close to the sun. Given his high public role with the British government, killing him directly would have been problematic. Instead, MI6 decided to take away that which was most precious to Al-Fayed, his oldest son, Doughty. Diana may have been collateral damage up to a certain point. Her dying with Doughty ensured that the bulk of the attention would focus on Diana. Her brother, the Earl of Spencer, and other members of the family remained close to the royals even after Diana's divorce. Could he or other family members or friends have been used to manipulate her into the meeting? Conversely, was someone pushing Al-Fayed to target Diana on his end? I can't help but shake the feeling that the Diana-Doughty romance, rather than being a threat to the British establishment, was a godsend. It was the equivalent of killing two birds with one stone, quite literally in this case. If Al-Fayed was working for Israel or suspected of working for Israel, it makes the timing of the event all the more intriguing. As was previously noted, the 1990s were a time in which Israel seems to have been making a full court press against the UK government following its decision to arm Iraq. Epstein was starting to sniff around the royals with the assistance of Ghislaine Maxwell, the daughter of a tycoon who died under mysterious circumstances in 1991. Was the death of Doughty and Diana ultimately an unsuccessful attempt to hold Israeli influence? There are some indications Diana was pro-Palestinian, but there's no question she expressed public support for Israel at times as well. If Al-Fayed was working for Israel, this may have been a factor in his decision to target Diana. If she was planning on a pro-Palestinian activism, Al-Fayed may have been tasked with directing her activism to ends more beneficial to Israel, such as targeting pro-Iraq politicians in the UK. Still, I have reservations about linking Al-Fayed with any one particular intelligence service or nation. In many ways, Al-Fayed is another Robert Maxwell-like figure. There's been a lot of dispute over the years as to whether Maxwell was ultimately loyal to Israel or the Soviets or NATO. I think in reality, he was loyal to no one, rather operating as a true free agent who collaborated with all parties at different times. Figures in organizations like Captain Bob became useful to the security services during Cold War for two reasons. A, to serve as back channels. While I do think that the Cold War was real, there were times when the different sides saw the value in collaborating. Going through official channels to manage this could lead to messy domestic political debates. Using a guy like Maxwell or Al-Fayed provided a much low-key means of managing this. A good example of this would be the meeting Al-Fayed arranged between Thatcher and the Sultan of Brunei to support the pound. If Thatcher had gone through official channels, she could have sparked a run on the pound. By using Al-Fayed, no one was the wiser until several years after the fact. The other advantage a guy like Maxwell or Al-Fayed offered was plausible deniability. Guys like Maxwell and Al-Fayed were ruthless, greedy, and known to work for anyone. They maintained security details staffed with former elite and intelligence and military personnel. They had the capabilities to carry out operations on par with state security services. but ascertaining who they ultimately work for could be nearly impossible. In many cases, they may have been conducting operations for different security services at any given time. While this could be very lucrative and confer oversized influence on someone like Maxwell or Al-Fayed, it also left them vulnerable. If they got too greedy or went after the wrong guy, their protection could be withdrawn. I suspect this is what happened to both Maxwell and Al-Fayed in the 90s.
Outside, the situation's serious. The earth went flat, the sun went black, and it's making me delirious. And I'm watching it all from this quarantine window, thinking, ooh, what a time to be woke. Yes, and I'm laughing just to keep from crying. It ain't funny, even if it is a joke. I'm talking about the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, I'm talking about the Twilight Zone. On a long, rugged road, a long way from home. I got these blue pills sitting on my nightstand, baby, and I feel like they was made just for you. They won't exactly get you high, but you might feel what it's like to lose. I got some red ones too, I keep them next to the blues. And man, it will go straight to your head. It takes about 18 months to kick in good, and my brother, you'll be seeing red. It goes with the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, it goes with the Twilight Zone. Been waiting out here for years, man, what took y'all so long? Well, old Morpheus, man, he stuck out his two hands. He said, take your pick, brother, yeah, man. Whoa, well, reached out and went snatch, and I gobbled them both up, natch. And then it's, oh no, oh no. Now the end of the world, it looks mighty fine, stumbling around, cold candy flipping, yeah, man, whoa. At first it made me sick, till I caught on to the trick, and now it's, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. I'm cool, baby, what about you? Now left is right and black is white. Everything turned upside down. I made a note to myself, I was gonna sort it all out if I could just make it back to town. But for now I'm stuck in this quarantine cloister. Hit me up, boys, we'll have us a time. I'm taking the rest of my red and blue pill stash. I'm gonna chop them up into purple lines, the color for the Twilight Zone. Yeah, man, it goes with the Twilight Zone. I'm gonna do one more bump, then I'll be over the hump. And now it's, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. You do the talking.
Finally, I want to briefly address the allegations of sexual misconduct against Al-Fayed. He seems to have been quite a sexual predator, targeting both women of legal age as well as minors. The allegations were first made in a 1995 Vanity Fair article. This was the same year Al-Fayed took down Aiken. Al-Fayed sued and forced a settlement, but he was awarded no damages. Rather, Vanity Fair was required to place all evidence in locked storage. In 1997, a current affairs program on ITV aired allegations from Herald employees that they were subjected to sexual harassment while working there. Nothing more was heard on this end until 2008, when it was revealed that the Metropolitan Police investigated Al-Fayed for allegations that he had sexually assaulted a 15-year-old girl. It would be nearly another decade in 2017 when allegations of sexual misconduct on the part of Al-Fayed were again raised by the press, only to be abandoned shortly thereafter. It was not until 2024, following Al-Fayed's death the prior year, the scale of these allegations became known. He had literally been accused of sexual misconduct by dozens, if not hundreds, of women for decades. The police had been receiving complaints against Al-Fayed since at least 1995, yet nothing was done during his lifetime. This is especially interesting, given that these allegations started around the time Al-Fayed was at war with the Tories. While previously Scallywag had aired allegations of pedophilia while Al-Fayed was sponsoring the publication, he never pursued anything like Kankura after Dodi was killed. Even though Al-Fayed surely would have been in a position to know what the British establishment got up to with those boys, he may even have been positioning himself for such an expose when he went after Aiken. As was previously noted, Aiken was a longtime Lister account member and a one-time chairman. In addition to arms trafficking, this network was deeply implicated in pedophile networks the world over. And this was especially true in Belgium, where Marc Dutroux was arrested again in 1996, the year following Aiken's takedown. The famous protest over the government cover-up in Belgium occurred in October 1996. Over 300,000 Belgian citizens turned up. What would have happened if Al-Fayed started leaking what the British partners in Le Cercle were up to around this time? Conversely, the British establishment never seriously used Al-Fayed's own acts of sexual misconduct against him either. It seems like, after the death of Diana and Dodi, there was arrangement in place where neither side would bring up arms trafficking or sexual misconduct. Instead, Al-Fayed perpetuated the notion that a Muslim heir to the British crown is what drove the assassinations. The great Geoffrey Gilson suggested that Al-Fayed found himself playing a game in which he thought that he knew the rules. But all the while, his opponents were playing by a different set of rules, a fact that he did not become aware of until the crash. In that regard, the message of including Diana is especially chilling. I suspect it was something along the lines of, if we'll do this to one of our own, Diana was very much a part of that British establishment, and just imagine what we'll do to the rest of your sons. All right, well, it's time for some Matthew now because my voice is about shot. So first off, Matthew, tell us a bit about a certain location involving the Earl of Spencer Stanley Kubrick initially used during the filming of Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah, so the Earl of Spencer's castle, found out recently, was used in Eyes Wide Shut for filming. I visited Emilio D'Alessandro quite recently. He was one of Stanley Kubrick's main, most personal and closest assistants. He was a friend as well as a colleague of Stanley Kubrick, and he knew him for decades, as did his wife. I visited his wife with him and their friend Paolo in Cassino in Italy, and that wasn't like in a casino as in an establishment. It was in a town called Cassino, which is a beautiful town where they live. And Emilio and his wife told me that Kubrick, they were around Kubrick a lot during the filming of Eyes Wide Shut, and they told me that Kubrick used the Earl of Spencer's castle for at least one scene in Eyes Wide Shut, the Earl of Spencer, of course, being Princess Diana's father. I think it may have been a scene involving a gate from what they recalled when they told me, so there are a couple of scenes with big gates in Eyes Wide Shut, as those who've seen the film will know. Then after Princess Diana's death, Kubrick actually stopped using that location out of respect for the family, which is what Emilio and his wife told me. And it's kind of interesting that he chose this location because in Eyes Wide Shut, as with a lot of other Kubrick films, there's a very deliberate sort of choice he has for choosing locations of filming to add a sort of subtextual layer, some would argue. Like in Eyes Wide Shut, not to go too off topic, but there's a street they used for filming called, in real life, called Worship Street, which obviously ties into Eyes Wide Shut's sort of occult worship scene in the film, things like that. The toy store at the end, as we'll talk later about that, that also was a location used deliberately by Kubrick, apparently, to say something subtextually about the film, possibly about Princess Diana, but we'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, so Princess Diana's father, his castle or mansion was used in Eyes Wide Shut. That's right.
Okay, Matthew, start off by explaining us how Harold's is referenced in Eyes Wide Shut.
Yeah, Howard's department store, which Mohamed Al-Fayed owned in the 1990s, Howard's department store had a toy section, and I've been told not by Emilio, funnily enough, but by a film director called Tony Zierra, who made a very good documentary about the making of Eyes Wide Shut. Tony Zierra told me that Kubrick apparently seemed to deliberately have the set of the toy store scene at the end of Eyes Wide Shut look pretty much exactly like the toy store section in Muhammad Al-Fayed's Harrods. Now, that may seem like a bit of a strange choice to make, but Tony Zierra was arguing that, Kubrick probably was saying something kind of subtextually or thematically by doing that. Now, look, if you look at videos from the time, such as in Tony Zierra's documentary, which is called SK13, about the making of Eyes Wide Shut, if you look at videos from the time, which are included in that documentary, Al-Fayed's Harrods did indeed have the toy store section looking pretty much exactly like the toy store at the end of Eyes Wide Shut. This is Stanley Kubrick we're talking about, so if something is that kind of blatantly uncannily similar, it's probably deliberate, Again, this is Kubrick we're talking about. So after Kubrick died, actually, Mohammed Al-Fayed actually invited Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman to this very toy store in Harrods. Al-Fayed was probably, according to Tony Zierra, when I talked to him, Al-Fayed was probably trying to bring Cruise and Kidman into his fold for reasons we'll talk about later, which is kind of weird. Basically, as a giant sort of screw you to Stanley Kubrick for reasons we'll talk about later. But yeah, so the toy store section at the end of Eyes Wide Shut just uncannily was made to look like Al-Fayed's Harrods, and it's a great scene, but people may wonder, well, why did Kubrick make the scene or the set look like that? And we'll get to that because there's some quite compelling possibilities why that may be the case. Also, Harrods is referenced in some more subtle ways in Eyes Wide Shut, as is Mohammed Al-Fayed. Al-Fayed owned 75 Rockefeller Plaza. Since at least 1993, that building was leased by none other than Time Warner, of Warner Brothers fame, obviously. I don't know when Al-Fayed took hold of that building specifically, but Rockefeller Plaza is name-dropped by a character towards the beginning of Eyes Wide Shut. Rockefeller Plaza obviously is the site of the famous Rainbow Room, and rainbows come up a lot in Eyes Wide Shut. There's the Rainbow Costume Shop, and a very weird scene like that. And, they talk about going where the rainbow ends in the same scene as they talk about Rockefeller Plaza near the beginning of the film. And it just so happens Mohammed Al-Fayed owned 75 Rockefeller Plaza. So read into that what you will. We don't know everything that was going through Kubrick's head, but given how detail-oriented he was and how he just was quite fond of referencing things in a very subtle manner, it seems like that may have been a reference to Al-Fayed as well, possibly in some way or another. The reason I think that it's quite compelling that might be a reference to Al-Fayed and his Harrods enterprise is Tony Zierra told me that Ted Turner of Time Warner was quite nervous about Eyes Wide Shut being released before it came out. This was apparently due to Ted Turner being worried that the film was going to just be a complete flop. He was possibly quite displeased with the film in terms of its content in some way or another, and him and other bigwigs in the studio may have been worried about it just not doing well at the box office, it being a flop. Mohamed Al-Fayed himself had other reasons for being worried about Eyes Wide Shut being released, which we'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, in a nutshell, those are the most explicit references to Harrods and Al-Fayed in Eyes Wide Shut. There are a couple more, even more, questionable ones. I don't know if you want to go into those, but that's those in a nutshell anyway.
Real quick, Matthew, by the way, too, there was also the lawsuit that Kubrick had brought in the mid 90s, right, over allegations of his mental health or something of that effect, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was going to bring that up. That ties into, the sort of the allegations, which now very much are well known now after Al-Fayed died, but were kind of known somewhat the 90s as well that Al-Fayed was a sexual predator. Those allegations. The lawsuit was sort of linked to those allegations and linked to Kubrick's possible knowledge of Al-Fayed being a sexual predator. Uh, so I don't know how, I know that you were planning maybe on discussing that later, but we can talk about that now if you like.
Yeah, yeah, get into Kubrick's awareness of Al-Fayed being a sexual predator.
Yeah, so in terms of this lawsuit, in the run-up to that lawsuit happening, um, Vanity Fair ran an article in 1995, and it was mentioned, about Muhammad Al-Fayed's allegedly quite sleazy and predatory even behavior. A journalist named Michael Gillard, I think is how you pronounce his name, knew Al-Fayed, and he told Vanity Fair that, Muhammad Al-Fayed would arrange just, a string of, young women to be at parties for visiting dignitaries and sheiks from the Middle East. The quote exactly was, "A string of girls were arranged." So it's kind of sinister. We now know that there are scores of women saying they were assaulted, abused, harassed by Muhammad Al-Fayed at Harrods while working for him, and possibly in other places as well. So this was all in the run-up to Eyes Wide Shut being filmed. It started filming in 1996. Kubrick was well underway with pre-production and research in 1995. Tony Zierra, who I mentioned earlier, told me that Kubrick studied the activities of people like Mohammed Al-Fayed and other people like him in terms of their, sexual misconduct or alleged sexual misconduct because of, writing characters for the film in Eyes Wide Shut, like Ziegler, Victor Ziegler, played by Sidney Pollack, who's sort of um, an elite deviant. And so Kubrick apparently was very interested in studying people like Al-Fayed and other people like him. Um, so how the lawsuit came about? Well, Mohammed Al-Fayed ended up taking over Punch magazine sometime during the production, I believe, of Eyes Wide Shut. And long story short, according to Tony Zierra, again, in his documentary SK13, Mohammed Al-Fayed was scared that he was going to be exposed by Kubrick in Eyes Wide Shut. I was curious as to what Tony meant when he put that in the documentary, because it wasn't elaborated much in the cut of the documentary that I saw. Tony Zierra told me, though, that this fear Al-Fayed had was possibly because one of the people quoted in the media during the 90s about being abused by Mohammed Al-Fayed was in fact a friend of the Kubrick family, which kind of shocked me when I heard that, And so it's possible that Kubrick or his relatives maybe heard about this misconduct of Al-Fayed, maybe had some additional information, who knows? And so that apparently was the root of the fact that Al-Fayed was scared that Eyes Wide Shut was somehow going to expose him or reference him in some sort of way that would make him obviously look very bad. So Al-Fayed owned Punch magazine. They ran an article toward the end of Kubrick's life in the run-up to Eyes Wide Shut being released, basically saying that Kubrick was, insane. And, the tone was very derisive, and it was sort of like, this film director is insane. I can't remember the exact content was, other than that. The nutshell of it was just, this man's mad. He's taking so long making his movies. Who can believe a word he says? I don't know exactly what they were. Kubrick didn't come out and say anything about this publicly. Neither did his family about, Al-Fayed's alleged sexual abuse of women. But it seemed possible that maybe this article was like a preemptive sort of way of staving off any heat that would come on Al-Fayed if Eyes Wide Shut did, quote unquote, expose him in some way, as the documentary SK13 claims. So that was the article, and Kubrick very uncharacteristically sued Al-Fayed's Punch magazine. This was all in the run-up to his death. He sued Punch magazine. It got quite a lot of media attention because it was so unlike him to do this. He was known for liking his privacy. He wasn't like, a complete recluse, but I mean, he was quite private in the later years of his life. Friends would come see him all the time. He didn't necessarily go out a huge lot to far-off locations or do very public things to try and communicate things or whatever. It was all very sort of, he liked his privacy. So it was a bit uncharacteristic, and he said to a Warner Brothers executive who was questioning him about this lawsuit that he has grandchildren. He said, "I've grandchildren. I don't want to be remembered as this nutcase. Because of Punch magazine's article." So that was ostensibly why he did the lawsuit. Kubrick was probably going to appear in court about this case. He was probably going to give a statement in court. I can't remember what the exact ins and outs of the procedure were, but it was very likely, according, I think, to a biography written recently about Kubrick by Nathan Abrams, and I think his name's Robert Kolker is the other man who wrote it. Kubrick was likely going to appear in court to testify about all this, about how it was defamatory to him. Obviously it was a very defamatory article, really. Kubrick was looking forward to appearing in court, or at least he was looking forward to seeing the fruits, hopefully, of his lawsuit against Al-Fayed's magazine. He was talking to his family about it very excitedly. And this was all when Eyes Wide Shut was also nearly ready to come out as well. And, depending on who you listen to, he was either really nervous about it coming out, or he was really excited, or a bit of both. So this was all happening. And then, Tom Cruise saw a cut of Eyes Wide Shut with Nicole Kidman and a couple of Warner Brothers executives. They had the cut flown to New York to watch it. And then for some reason, as Tony Zierra talks about in SK13, Tom Cruise and his publicist, a woman named Pat Kingsley, requested to see the cut again. That's something that hasn't been given much attention until Tony did his documentary about it. Pat Kingsley wanted to see the film with Tom Cruise. I mean, the implication maybe was that they were worried that maybe in some way how it portrayed Tom Cruise. We don't exactly know why they wanted to do this. But that was right before Kubrick's death. Kubrick died maybe about a couple of days ago, might have even been the next night, something like that. Apologies, I don't know the exact dates. It was in March, anyway, I believe, of 1999. So he died.
Al-Fayed didn't try to. Did he befriend Tom Cruise before this or afterwards? When he saw the final cut?
So I don't know for sure, but I think there may possibly have been some connection between them on a personal level, maybe before he saw the cut, because in 1997, Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, of course, attended Princess Diana's funeral. Upon their death, they attended the funeral. So it's possible there was a friendship between Cruise, Kidman, and the Al-Fayeds, long before they saw the cut. So, I mean, if both Tom Cruise and Al-Fayed were concerned about the film in some way, one would wonder why, it's interesting. And on that note, Pat Kingsley, who I just mentioned, Tom Cruise's publicist, She was Dodi Al-Fayed's publicist at the exact same time. She was a real powerful kind of agent, publicity agent for Hollywood stars and film producers, stuff like that. She was Dodi Al-Fayed's publicist during this exact same time frame in the 90s, which is a very interesting link. So, yeah, it's possible they knew each other, the Al-Fayeds and Cruz, yeah.
Yeah, definitely with the overlap with publicists, I think that definitely increases the possibility they would have been familiar with one another beforehand. One other thing I'll point out that's interesting too. So the original Guardian story that outed Jonathan Aikens involved in the arms trafficking came out in April 1995, and the Vanity Fair article you've been talking about, I think it's called Ward Herald, came out in September 1995. So it
Yeah,
kind of seems like it was a bit of tit for tat with these two stories coming out. That's very interesting.
it's very interesting. Yeah, I never necessarily thought about that in terms of the timing of that. So, yeah, it does make you wonder.
Sorry, to set the stage for the big reveal here a bit, give us some details about the break-in that occurred at the Eyes Wide Shut set.
Yeah, so basically, I visited the Stanley Kubrick archives and I looked through some documents, and I believe it was the second time I was there, maybe about a year or two now. I found a document, a shooting summary, basically, summarizing what they did on a particular day. And on October 23rd, 1997, so that would have been what, like just after Princess Diana's death and Dodi Al-Fayed's death. They were filming at Elvedon Hall. I believe that was where the massive occult orgy scene was filmed in Eyes Wide Shut. And according to this document I read, two windows to the actors' trailers were found broken. They seem to be saying it was two different trailers. I'm not sure exactly. The way it's worded is a bit strange. Two windows to the artist's trailers were found broken. And they say explicitly in the document indicating a break-in, although no access was gained. Make of that what you will. Now, I don't know, was this Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman's trailers? I really don't know, but it was interesting that it seemed to be two windows or possibly two trailers, so I don't know. Anyway, the security guard of the firm hired that day, according to the document I read, could not give an explanation for why this occurred. He became quite angry when he was questioned about it further, and he was fired. Adding to this was that the previous day, another security guard had gone home early for some reason. That could be totally innocuous, but I just thought it was interesting. When I talked to Emilio D'Alessandro, Emilio did remember this break-in occurring. He immediately recalled it when I mentioned it, and I thought that was interesting. And he mentioned that there were some problems with the security. Some of the security people hired, one man in particular, was a bit difficult, a bit obnoxious with some of the crew. So that may have played into him getting fired, as well as like, not noticing, some possible break-in occurring or doing nothing about it because he didn't know it was happening or whatever. So that's the break-in that happened. Emilio told me that whoever broke into the set was looking for something. Emilio doesn't know what they were looking for, but Emilio was very definite, and he said to me, "Well, yeah, I mean, they were obviously looking for something." So I don't know what to make of that. Um, your guess is as good as mine about who may have done the break-in. During this time, there was a lot of weird stuff happening. You had obviously, news reporters going to some desperate lengths to get a photo of Stanley Kubrick and Tom Cruise, because Kubrick, had not been photographed for quite a long time because he didn't necessarily like the media that much. There was a reporter who climbed on top of a wall, I think, of the set and surreptitiously took a photo of Cruise and Kubrick. We, kind of know that story quite well at this stage. I'm not sure if this break-in was related to reporters, trying to sneak in and get photos or get some juicy gossip. Given that reporter we just mentioned earlier got on top of a wall and took those photos, I presume someone would have noticed if a reporter had like snuck in directly. I don't know. Um, During this period as well, the Church of Scientology, according to a book that was published a few years ago by an ex-Scientologist, I believe the Church of Scientology sent members to spy on Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in the UK during the filming of Eyes Wide Shut. The head of Scientology, I think, was worried Cruise was rethinking his membership of the church. Um, the Daily Beast also, I think, ran an article on this. So I'm not sure, but anyway, it was in that book I mentioned. Cruise's confessions to the church may have been used as blackmail against him. Scientology members confessing their quote unquote sins and then them possibly using it against their members. So all this drama was happening, very strange things, possible wiretapping of Cruise and Kidman's phones by the Scientologists. There was an actor in Eyes Wide Shut with a small role who was a Scientologist, and he was always with Tom Cruise. He was sort of like his, I don't know what, like some sort of, almost like a handler
Finder.
almost. Yeah, yeah. And it got to the point where Kubrick actually said, hey, you're with Tom so much. Let's make you an extra in the film, or like not an extra, let's make you a featured extra. Let's give you even a small role. So he plays like a butler near the beginning of the film who kind of shows Cruise to a room or something. And he's near the end of the film as well. He's in a scene, so that was kind of interesting. So that was all happening about the Scientologists reportedly stalking Cruise and Kidman during this time frame. So, make of that what you will. I have no idea if the break-in was linked to that, but it's anyway. So who knows who did that break-in? Possibly relevant is that on the same day as that break-in, a Range Rover, according to the document I read, a Range Rover was being sent back to the US from Pinewood Studios, where the filming was happening. So again, probably not relevant, but I just thought it was interesting. A couple of days prior to that, there was actually another accident on the set where a skip was being delivered and it hit a trailer and the security wasn't there for some reason. So that was another kind of reason they were like fed up with the security and decided to get new ones. So again, those two incidents are probably unrelated, but I just thought there was a lot of weird stuff, kind of drama, catastrophe a little bit happening during those few days, right in the wake of Princess Diana's death as well. So it was quite an emotional time for the crew, I'm sure.
Yeah,
And yeah, that's the break-in. Yeah.
she died in I believe it was August 30th or 31st, 1997. So this would have been about 3 months, I believe, a little less than 3 months afterwards.
Yeah.
Uh, and then, so the other sort of thing to put this in perspective, so you had the two articles appearing in 1995, the one targeting Aiken in April, and then you had the one targeting Al-Fayed in September. Should probably also add then in 96, not directly related to events in the UK, but in Belgium, Marc Dutroux arrested again, and then you have the massive protest in October of 1996. And, again, to repeat this, the Le Cercle figures in Belgium were very closely connected to their partners in the UK, and you just had Aiken, the Le Cercle chairman at the time, taken down by Al-Fayed in that expose by The Guardian. So there's a lot of like really interesting stuff that was playing out around this time, and then we kind of get into 97, and you have the crash, the Killstody Fayed and Princess Diana. And then you would have had this break-in occurring about 3 months after that. So it's been a lot of really interesting developments that have played out like leading up to this time. So anyway, this gets us here to the big moment here. So Matthew, tell us a bit about what Emilio told you about a certain white Fiat.
Yeah, this kind of shocked me as well. I didn't even know the full significance of it when Emilio told me this, until you actually brought to my attention why a white Fiat Uno is so significant. When I was talking to Emilio there in the town of Cassino in Italy, he mentioned, as soon as I mentioned the break-in and he remembered it and that kind of thing, he then started telling me a couple of more things about bizarre things that were happening on the set of Eyes Wide Shut. Um, he recounted one in particular where he kept being followed for some reason by a man in a white Fiat Uno, following him during the production of Eyes Wide Shut. On multiple occasions, even at one point at least, maybe more on the highway in England. And, on this occasion, Emilio looked around to see who was in the car. I mean, the car was actually at this point kind of chasing him really on the highway. And Emilio was trying. I mean, Emilio's a very good driver. If you've read his autobiography, I think it's called S is for Stanley. No, sorry, Stanley Kubrick and Me, I think it's called, and there was a film made of it. S is for Stanley. Emilio was a very good driver, long history of like, being interested in sports cars, motor racing, general automobile stuff. So he was a skilled driver and he was trying to get away from this guy following him on the highway. And he looked around and he saw it was a man chasing him, driving this white Fiat Uno, talking on a big 1990s telephone while he was chasing Emilio, like he was reporting to someone. That's what Emilio told me. This was around the same time as the break-in that we just mentioned. So this was around October 1997. Rather eerily, yeah, so this was around the same time as Princess Diana's death and Dodi Al-Fayed's death, which, the white Fiat Uno element of that story is quite a famous element of it. Emilio mentioned to me pointedly that this was around the same time as Diana's death, but he didn't say explicitly that he thought it was related. And I had not really looked into Princess Diana's death at all. I was only vaguely aware of it, so I didn't really understand the significance of it being a white Fiat Uno. Then when you brought up to me that fact about the white, or that story about the white Fiat Uno, I did kind of think it was intriguing. So, when this happened, Emilio was driving Kubrick around a lot in a Rolls Royce. I don't know if this Fiat Uno ever chased them when Kubrick was with Emilio or only when Emilio was by himself. I don't know. But Kubrick asked Emilio what was happening
Now,
about
to
this.
clarify right quick, Matthew, this Emilio was also driving one of Kubrick's vehicles, correct?
Yeah, 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 I believe so. A Rolls Royce, yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to like clarify that so everybody knows like what we're, this is actually one of Kubrick's cars that was being followed too.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, absolutely. So, yeah, I think Emilio even said during that highway chase, he may have been driving the Rolls Royce on that particular occasion. I can't remember, but definitely during this period, he was driving Kubrick's Rolls Royce. So, yeah, for all the driver of the Fiat Uno knew, the driver may have thought it was Kubrick in there, not Emilio. I don't know. Would have thought he would have seen Emilio because the incidents happened a lot. I mean, Emilio every day almost a certain point would see this white Fiat Uno and someone inside it, waiting there when he arrived at the set kind of a thing or was closing up the shop, and this white Fiat Uno would be there. Emilio told me that he brought it up with Stanley Kubrick and Kubrick asked Emilio like, well, I mean, how do you know you're being followed, Emilio? And Emilio was like, well, you'd have to be an idiot not to know that he's following me because it's closer each day, and all this kind of thing, using quite intimidating tactics, maybe trying to make it obvious that they're being followed in a sort of intimidating way. And then I think Kubrick may have kind of then firmly started believing, yeah, you're being followed, be careful, is what Emilio told me. So, yeah. The security team, according to Emilio, really shrugged off the thing about the Fiat Uno. I think this was the security team present when that break-in happened. It was all during the same month, according to Emilio, so it probably was. According to Emilio, they kind of just shrugged off this Fiat Uno thing, like, probably not a big deal, nothing to worry about. But Stanley, Kubrick, and Emilio both kind of mutually agreed, no, it is something to worry about, and this security team is hopeless. Let's get a new security team. So they did, And I think the break-in was the thing that really topped off that, it was the final straw. It was really creepy for them, really, what was happening. And Kubrick was getting older at this point. I mean, he was heading towards 70, I think. He died, obviously, as I mentioned, right after Cruise and Pat Kingsley saw the cut of the film. So, it would have been very stressful for Kubrick, I imagine, who kind of worked himself to death, really, by many accounts. So, yeah, that was the white Fiat Uno incident. Emilio told me I think Emilio mentioned from memory that the police did catch the person who was driving the Fiat Uno who stalked them, but that Emilio had no information about who this guy actually was or why he was stalking them. If the police even did catch him, I think Emilio mentioned they did. Emilio wasn't told anything about who he was or why. I don't know, was Kubrick even told? I've no idea. So anyway, that was all happening in the immediate aftermath of Princess Diana's death.
Yeah, it's just incredibly fascinating in the context of what was playing out really in the British press during this time, first with Al-Fayed's cash for questions, exposés of various Tories, then followed by the Vanity Fair article that indicated his sexual improprieties, and then continuing on with many of the allegations that Al-Fayed would make through organizations like the LaRoche Group and so forth, following the death of Dodi and Diana and the crash. So there was a lot of stuff being released by both sides. I mean, the Royals have put out their own narratives too in various works. So, I mean, it does sort of beg the question if somebody was deliberately feeding Kubrick information for Eyes Wide Shut that was supposed to perpetuate this in one way or other. I mean, who might have been doing it? I mean, obviously, is anyone's guess, given how incestuous this overall network is. It's more, I guess, suppose in a lot of ways like a family feud. But with all of the intrigues playing in, it is really, really fascinating to consider the implications of what was going on with Eyes Wide Shut in this new light.
It is, and I think the sense of danger and evil in the film, and of vulnerable people like the daughter in the film of Cruise and Kidman. At the end of the film, some viewers think that it kind of looks like she's being led off by a couple of older men in the toy store, as if she's maybe about to be abducted or something. It's kind of a yeah. I think even people who are kind of mainstream critics agree it kind of does look like that. So there is a sense of danger in the film, and Kubrick was very protective of his family, very protective of his daughters. It's possible that feeding into that sense of danger was the fact that, apparently Kubrick and his family were friends with someone who talked to the media about being abused by Mohamed Al-Fayed in the 90s. So, it kind of plays into that sense of, as I said, danger and evil quite well in the context of the film. So, in terms of people feeding him information, yeah, I mean, I don't know, was it that person in particular? Was it others as well? Who knows? Kubrick he did a lot of friends in high places, obviously. He had a lot of friends from political circles. He seemed to have a disdain for the Labour Party. Um, but people couldn't really make out where he stood politically, but he seemed to be quite fiscally conservative, at least. But yeah, he'd make comments about the Labour Party, indicating that he really didn't like them for various reasons. Their film tax proposal may have been one reason, obviously. But Kubrick made references, I think, to the Tories, to the Conservative Party in Eyes Wide Shut, which is interesting as well. So. Yeah, I don't know what he was trying to say with some of those things, but if he was talking to Mohammed Al-Fayed, let's just say they would have had a lot of interesting conversations about these sorts of political figures.
Well, that is a good note to end things on. It has been an absolutely fascinating conversation, Matthew. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing this with me and the audience. Real quick here before we sign off, can you tell the kids a bit about your Mothman movie you got coming out?
Yeah, well, thanks, Stephen. I hope this was interesting, what you heard from me. So thanks very much for having me on. It's fascinating. I really did find it fascinating. So yeah, Mothman, the film that never was, totally unrelated to Eyes Wide Shut. That documentary is coming out soon. I filmed and directed it, and filmed a lot of it in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. That's coming out in a couple of months. It'll be on my Substack website, just for a very small paywall fee, just a maybe $5 kind of subscription to my Substack, and then people will be able to watch the entire documentary. It's a feature-length documentary. It goes into, mafia activity in West Virginia, and the film crew's experiences of that mafia activity in the 90s. It's coming out very soon, so yeah, I'm looking forward to releasing that.
Yeah, I saw a version of it at the Mothman Festival this past year, and it has got a lot of really interesting stuff in it. So yeah, guys, check that out if you get a chance.
In a couple months, yeah, it's not out yet, but it will be in a couple of months. And on that note as well, I'd urge everyone to look out for Tony Zierra's documentary SK-13. Kubrick's Endgame is the full title. There's little bit of stuff of about Mohamed Al-Fayed in that documentary. Not nearly as much as we've discussed here, but it's kind of what set me off being intrigued about the Al-Fayed connection.
Well, again, thank you so much. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And on that note, we will sign off for now. As always, I want to thank everybody so much for listening and your support. And with that, good night and good luck to you all.